Hi, my name is Michelle, and this is my Lab 1 report. In this experiment, I created a charge tape by quickly pulling apart two pieces of tape. This action allowed charges to be transferred to the U tape. The ultimate goal of this lab was to observe the interactions the tape has with different objects to determine the sign of charge of the U tape. Following that, I was able to calculate the charge and the number of deficient electrons that were present on the U tape. The three fundamental physics principles I used to complete this lab was force gravity, Coulomb's law, and the fact that like charges repel and opposite charges attract. This principle is especially important as it is what helped me determine the sign of charge of the U tape. A brief summary of my results is that the charge of the U tape is positive, and in order to calculate the charge of the U tape, I had to set force electric equal to force gravity, and that neutral objects are attracted to charged objects. The three assumptions that I made during this lab was that air resistance is negligible, each tape was treated as a point charge, and that each U tape had the same net charge. There were several interactions I observed between the U tape and other objects. The U tape was attracted to both my hand and a book, which is a neutral object. Although I stated that opposite charges attract, it is important to note that when a charged object is held near a neutral object, the two objects will be attracted to one another. This phenomenon is known as polarization. The U-tape, which is an insulator, is creating an induced dipole in the book as the tape's electric field pushes the electron cloud and nucleus of the book's atoms in opposite directions. Because of this, the book is now temporarily attracted to the U-tape. The observation that led me to determine the charge of the U-tape was that it was attracted to a negatively charged pen. Since I know that opposite charges attract, I was able to conclude that the sign of charge of the U-tape was positive. This means that when I hold two U-tapes next to each other, they repel. The second half of this experiment was focused on the two repelling U-tapes. I measured the minimum distance to make the top tape float and was able to use this number to calculate the charge of tape B. Since tape B's momentum is 0 when floating, I concluded that the net force is equal to 0. This means that force electric plus force gravity is equal to 0. Therefore, I was able to set the magnitudes equal to each other and solve for the charge of the U-tape. It is important to note when using Coulomb's law, I used the assumption that both tape A and tape B have the same charge. I have shown on the right side how I calculated the number of deficient electrons by dividing the charge of tape B by the charge of one electron. I have also shown how I determined the number of atoms on the sticky surface by dividing the surface area of the tape by the surface area of an atom. Here I am assuming that the cross-section of an atom can be represented by a square. For my code, I utilized my function from Lab 0, but tweaked it to calculate the electric force on tape B. I then displayed force gravity and force electric arrows on the blue sphere, which is tape B. The orange arrow is force electric on B by A. This arrow is pointing up because tape A and tape B repel each other since they are like charges. The white arrow is force gravity. As you can see, both arrows are equal in magnitude and opposite in direction, which is what my calculations supported. To conclude with, there were several things I learned by completing this lab. I learned that charges cannot be created nor destroyed, only transferred. And I also learned how to create an induced dipole and what exactly goes on at a microscopic level during polarization. There were a few challenges I faced during this lab. The biggest one was measuring the distance tapes B floated on top of tape A. It was difficult to do this with only one person, so I had to get another set of hands to measure while I held tape A. I also had to be careful when handling the U-tape so it did not lose any of its charge. Often when I pulled it from the base, it would get attracted to my hand, which affected how it performed in the experiment. Thank you for listening to my Lab 1 report.